My name's Russ Gurley. I'm an OSU grad. I graduated, I was with a BFA in painting and graphic design. I painted with Marty Averett and Dean Bloodgood, who are still artists in Stillwater. I've kept and bred rare reptiles for most of my life, and I've been an artist, mostly a painter. But I was approached about 10 years ago by a friend who runs the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum in Hollywood. They had a special project they needed help with, and it was a sculpture, and I'm a painter, but I told him I would help, and through that I was approached by a museum, and they had a real Osmont tribal skull from New Guinea, and they were going to do an oceanic art traveling exhibit. And they didn't want to take their real Osmont skull because it's priceless, because there are very few in museums in the US. So they hired me and a friend to create a replica. And of course, these skulls in New Guinea are held together with tree sap and mud and seashells and all of that stuff. So we had to come up with a way to create one that's sturdy and would take, if something happened, it wouldn't get destroyed. So we created this skull, and it was pretty successful, and we enjoyed it. So we kind of veered off. He's an artist. He's more of a graphic design artist. So we started making these skulls just for ourselves, basically. And we found, we went to a big reptile show in Chicago and sold a few of them, and it was, again, kind of fun and successful. And then we discovered this big show in LA that's for special effects and kind of that horror movie industry. So we got a booth there, and I've been doing that show twice a year for, I guess, 11 years. So all of these skulls have kind of spun off from that one museum project. So all of the skulls I create are what you would see in a museum. They're not, demon skulls or devil skulls or anything like that. They're all natural history pieces that you would, if an anthropologist at a museum saw them, they would say, oh, that's Osmont or Dayak or these different tribes. So I could show you a couple. You want to see a couple? So this is a Dayak skull from New Guinea. This is, of course, a resin skull. I start with just a white resin skull, and I stain and paint and carve and add. In New Guinea, the Osmont, this would be a grandparent or an aunt or uncle. They would clean the skull and decorate it and actually hang it in their homes as like a family heirloom, or to remember a family member. So they're always decorative. They usually have seashells. These are beads from a plant, seeds from a plant. And then another tribe in Southeast Asia is called the Dayak from Borneo. So their skulls would be this would be a victim. This would be somebody they defeated in battle. They would remove their body, bury the body for fertilizer for sweet potatoes, and then they would decorate the skull with animal skulls, and they would carve demons and things on them, and they would hang these outside of the village to warn other villages, don't come beyond this point. So that part of the world, they did things with human skulls. It's kind of unique to that part of the world, but for very different reasons. So this crowd that goes to this show in LA that I was telling you about is very sophisticated when it comes to skulls and things like that. So I've had to kind of modify what I do over the years. Like I said, I've been going for 11 years, so they want to see something new. My customers want to see something new. So I have done African skulls, African voodoo skulls. I have a lot of, this is a wild boar skull that's covered with cowrie shells, and so this is obviously a gorilla skull, decorated with voodoo symbols. This is a resin skull. Of course, gorillas are endangered species, so you can't use real skulls. So I have a lion, tiger, a gorilla skull, an orangutan skull, and then of course they're all resin. So they come as just a white, plain white resin skull. Here's one that's in the early stages. I've stained it and created the teeth, but I don't have any carving or painting yet on it. So I'll do that before my next show is coming up this summer. So another thing I started creating for this show in LA, I do these little shrunken head replicas. These are made for tourists in Ecuador, and they're made out of goat skin. So they take the goat skin and they boil it, and they put it on a form, and it shrinks to the form, and they just sort of cut little eyes and mouth and sell them to tourists for a few bucks. So I buy them from Ecuador, and I go in and I create a nose, I create the lips, the ears, kind of paint them to match, and so they look more realistic. And so I do a lot of these at the shows also. So yeah. So another thing I do, like I mentioned earlier, I've been keeping and breeding rare reptiles for about 40 years, I guess. I've written 11 or 12 books, mostly on unusual stuff, scorpions, tarantulas. I've written 4 or 5 books on turtles. So yeah, I used to produce a lot of babies, and kind of we would trade them with each other, other guys that keep and breed reptiles. And it's a huge hobby. For people that don't know, it's like people that keep tropical fish or canaries or those things you kind of know, but the general public doesn't realize that it's reptile business is a multi-billion dollar business in the U.S. So I sort of specialize, since I've got so many other things going on, writing and art. I kind of just specialize in real unusual species that either people are having a hard time getting them to reproduce, or getting the eggs to hatch, or babies to live and thrive. So I've been sort of focused on that little niche part of herpetoculture, which is the keeping and breeding of reptiles and amphibians. So I have some unusual snakes from South Africa, some big lizards from the Middle East, and so kind of proud of that, my history in that part of the world too. So, you know, I grew up over by Wintersmith Park here in Ada. When I was a kid, I'd come home and throw down my backpack and go down to Wintersmith Lake and catch snakes and turtles, and it just sort of never went away. After OSU, I went to California, and I met some guys that had just started this special group for keeping and breeding rare reptiles, and so they invited me in, and we created a magazine called The Vivarium. I was the art director. That's when I sort of started building a collection of reptiles, and then it just kind of has always been there with me. So no matter where I've lived across the country, I've always had reptiles, and written books and articles and how to care for them properly and that sort of thing. So yeah. So I've got this show in LA. It's called Monster Palooza, but it's the largest show for special effects and art that are related to sort of horror and sci-fi and fantasy. And there's a spring show in LA, and then there's a fall show that's in Burbank. So I do both of those. They're huge shows. They have the one in LA, Pomona, has probably it's Pasadena, sorry, has probably 20,000 people through in 3 days. And a lot of celebrities, you know, the guy that played Jason, and the third girl that was killed by the second Freddy, you know, those sorts of celebrities there signing posters and stuff. But it's mainly for artists that do a little bit of unusual stuff. You'll see bronzes and lots of paintings and sculptures, and so I found that little crowd. It's been really a fun trip. It's expensive to get there because I have to ship. The skulls are, again, they're resin, so they're fairly fragile, and I have lots of horns and beadwork and feathers, and so it's expensive to get them packed up and shipped out there, and it takes me 2 days to drive out. But it's been worth it because it's a good crowd, and they love spending money on art, especially unusual art. So So the next one is the end of May and early June in Pasadena. And then the smaller show is usually September, October. So yeah, it's crazy. So probably the most, there's a lot of them, but there's a guy named Rick Baker who's won, I don't know, 6 or 7 Academy Awards for doing gorilla makeup. He's the one that did the original, not the original, but the 70s King Kong, Gorillas in the Mist, Dian Fossey. He's the guy that makes the gorilla suits. He's like the godfather out there. Everybody loves to see him come through the show. And my first show, he came to my booth and stopped and asked, "What's your story?" And I said, "I'm just a guy from Oklahoma, you know, a small town in Oklahoma." And as it turned out, his mom was from Oklahoma, which is kind of cool. But he spent maybe a half hour at my booth talking about mummies and shrunken heads and skulls. And when he left, the guy at the booth next to me said, "Wow." And I said, "What?" And he goes, "Those guys never stop." Because those guys that have been doing this their entire lives, you know, he's in his 70s, they've just seen it all. You know, they walk through these shows and they've kind of seen all the Frankensteins and all the Creature from the Black Lagoon and all of that stuff. So it made me feel really good that he saw something unique in my art. And I've had that a couple of times. I've got a couple of other kind of famous in that world kind of makeup and special effects people have kind of befriended me, and when I show up, they come and see what new pieces I've got. I try to have 40 pieces at every show, and of those, probably maybe half will be from a previous show that I haven't sold yet, and so I'll make another 20, 2 dozen for each upcoming show, because I have a lot of customers that want to see something new and exciting. So I'll spend, I'm actually working now, but I've got, I'll work all you know, March and April, early May to get ready. And then in the middle of May, I'll pack everything up and ship it out. And unless I drive out, then I pull it in a trailer. So I did get to spend about half an hour with Pee Wee Herman too, which was very cool. One of my friends that does makeup and kind of started out with Pee Wee Herman in LA, she invited me to come and to his booth where he was signing autographs. And of course there were 200 people in line, and we cut right to the front and sat with him for about a half an hour. And this was probably, I guess, about a year before he died probably, but that was really an honor to kind of sit there and hang out with him. So, you know, it rotates. I mean, I'll make something and I'll think that's cool. I'm not going to sell it, so I'll put it in my studio or here in my living room. And then after a year, maybe I'll make something else that I really like, and I'll say, okay, well, it's time to swap it out. So I'll show you. This is probably one of my newest favorite ones. I don't know if you can see it. It's, but this is sort of an African kind of voodoo design, but it's stained, carved, and painted. So I'm just really happy with it. I like the contrast of all the dark and pale yellow. But this is my favorite one now. But like I said, it'll probably it'll change. You know, I'll make a dozen pieces the next couple of weeks, and maybe I'll have a new exciting one. You know, it's so like this piece. This piece was pretty simple because it's just a stained skull, a little bit of carving, but not much. But I sat and pieced this abalone or seashell mosaic all over it. And then attaching the horns is usually tough. I don't use any hot glue or metal. Everything I create is wooden dowels and epoxy with peat moss and those sorts of things. I don't want it to be, I don't want anybody to recognize it as something that was made from, you know, stuff from a craft store. So a lot of the time is spread out. So I'll stain them. First, you have to clean them up. They're resin, they're poured resin, so you have to kind of clean them up to make them look like a skull. And then I stain them, and then a lot of times I'll go back in and stain them another 2 or 3 times to get lots of different, to age them. And then they have to sit for about a week and dry. And then if I carve them, clean them off, and then I have to restain the carve marks. And then from then, it's really kind of what You know, I've got one over there that's got 5 or 6 different horns on it, and you can only attach them one at a time, and you have to wait for your epoxy to dry. So the simple ones that are just painted, you know, maybe a couple of hours. And then the more elaborate ones may take 6 or 8 hours, spread out over, you know, a couple of weeks or even a couple of months. So again, it's a wide variety, and it's funny, sometimes the simple ones are the ones that are the most popular, you know, with just a nice clean paint job. You kind of never know really what somebody's going to be drawn to. Oh, yeah, in fact, after one of my first shows, I would say maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I got contacted by a dentist in Kansas, and he wanted a clown skull. This was literally an aged skull with teeth missing, and it had a big bone nose for a clown skull. And he loved it so much, he ordered, I think I ended up doing about 3 for him. He ordered one for a friend, maybe, I can't remember if they were all dentists or not, but yeah, he ended up commissioning me to do 3 different ones. And I've done a couple of skulls for bands, kind of bands that have maybe a dark flair to them, and so they wanted them for, I created a bunch of little skulls for a swag table, and then a couple of skulls for them to have on stage early on. But that's it's hard to have a website or an Etsy store. You know, I have a lot of friends say, hey, get an Etsy store and you'll make a fortune. But each one is unique. So it's difficult with all my other projects and teaching that, you know, if I sell one and I forget to remove it from my store and somebody else wants it, or it's difficult when you're creating an art piece that's unique, that you have to be on it every day and you know, update your store and your shopping carts and all of those things. So I typically, I've done lots of other shows. I've done oddity shows and other art shows, but I found that those 2 in LA are enough. You know, it's a big enough project to get enough to show, to make all the expense worthwhile. And so I do that spring show and the fall show, and then everything else is just sort of occasional. I donate quite a bit for reptile conservation. There's a thing called Croc Fest in Florida. It's usually in Florida, and I usually will donate. I've got this is a crocodile skull, again resin, because they're endangered species, but this is done in that Osmot style from New Guinea. So I usually donate one of these a year to conservation or some special fundraising thing. So, well, so the original project I did for it, they had a 2-headed, 3-legged parrot, and it was just a fake taxidermy thing, but they had it in their warehouse, not on exhibit, and a rat got into their warehouse and chewed it up. Chewed, I think, a couple of legs off and a wing. So they hired me to fix that parrot. That was the original project I did for them. And so I worked with my epoxy. Again, I told them I'm a painter, I'm not a sculptor, but I'll try. So, but it was nice. They shipped it to me, I fixed it. And then my friend and I, they flew us out to LA, and we got to hang out with some of the, at a Star Wars themed bar, and with Kevin Smith, and it was really cool. Yeah, so that was fun. And then that's the project that led to that first museum skull that I created. So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I said, I never really considered myself a sculptor. You know, I'm a painter. I paint acrylic on canvas. I paint a lot of course, wildlife, and I've painted skulls, and I've painted a lot of reptiles and vampire bats and all sorts of things. But having this sort of it surprised me, you know, that it has been a thing. And like I said, this is my 11th year of creating these and flying out to LA and setting up. I have a large booth that looks a little bit like a laboratory or a museum basement. You know, it's got a big wooden shelf with puck lights, and so each one has a skull, and all of my tags I use like museum specimen tags. So, because I really do want to give that vibe of you know, this is not Halloween stuff. You know, these are natural history pieces, and I want people to feel like they have a tribal skull in their collection that's unique.
That's pretty good.